Good morning, everyone. We're going to switch it up here a little bit. You'll have to go back a couple pages to the last presentation. My name's Scott Worley, and I'm going to talk about 401ks, and then we'll go back to Jessica. But can everybody hear me okay? I'm not going to use the mic. I'm not used to using the mic. You can't? Okay, well then I'll use the mic, not a problem. Can you hear me now? Is that much better? Okay, all right. If I start to stray away from the mic, please raise your hand and tell me so. Okay. As I said, my name's Scott Worley. I work with Herbein Wealth Management, separate entity from Herbein and Company, mainly geared around investments. Part of my job there is managing the qualified retirement plan part of our business. 401ks, profit sharing plans, cash balance plans, defined benefit plans. As a way of history, you've seen my bio. I used to work for Vanguard, giving advice to endowments, foundation, institutional, DB plans, as well as 401k participants. So I'm the one in the office that goes out and conducts the employee enrollment meetings, the employee education meetings for their 401k and answer a lot of their questions. So what I'd like to do today is go over a couple of points. Why should we even consider 401k? If we don't have one in place, should we consider it? What are some of the responsibilities that the Department of Labor expects from employers, plan sponsors? Okay, I'm going to use that term those terms interchangeably. We're also going to look at the traditional service model of implementing a 401k, some of the hot buttons that the regulators are going through. And then go over kind of my thoughts on a better way to improve that benefit, because it truly is a benefit to employees. Skipped over one here. So let's talk about some of the benefits of the 401k. It's a great tool and a great benefit for people to prepare for retirement. A lot of people always ask me, Scott, well, what about Social Security? Right now, Social Security will only replace about 1/3 of your salary in retirement. And those who are younger, any guesses, is it going to be around? Don't know, okay? So one of the other tools that are available is the 401k. A lot has changed since then. Now what's a Roth 401k is being offered. The assumption there is, I assume that I may be in a higher tax bracket later, so I want to pay the taxes now, okay? So that's an option. We don't see too much of that. A lot of people put it in place if their employees ask for it, okay? Payroll deductions. We're all creatures of habit, right? So if I'm an employee and I get my paycheck and it goes into my checking account, if I'm not a good saver, I'm going to end up spending it, right? But if they sign up for the 401k, it comes out of their paycheck before it even gets to them. So it's a great tool. A lot of plans are looking at auto enrollment. In other words, allowing employees, they have to opt out of actually participating. They also look at auto escalation. So maybe we'll start you at 3%, and then each year we're going to raise it by 1% until you hit a max of 6 or 7%. Okay? A lot of employers are doing this to help their employees take advantage of this benefit. There are a lot of people say, I have a lot of clients and prospects who come to me and say, Scott, as an owner, I'm limited to what I can put into these things, and I really want to use it. What I tell them is, let's look at your plan design, because there are ways to make sure that the employer can put in the max for the owners. Okay, so why not 401k? Well, employers and sponsors have a fiduciary responsibility. Now, if I ask you what fiduciary is, some of you may know, some of you may not. But really, as is explained, you must do the best thing that you can for others, meaning your employees. You must act with prudence, diligence, care, and skill. Okay? So you're responsible for making sure that the costs are reasonable, that you're offering everything that they may need to achieve success. That includes looking at the investments being offered. Most plans today are moving to participant-directed, where the employees choose what investments are available. While you're not responsible for them choosing a specific investment, you are responsible for what you're offering them, okay? Now, there's some ways that you can kind of get around that and help share some of that liability. So let's take a look at the traditional service model. A prospect comes to me and they say, Scott, I'd like to implement a 401k. How do we do it? The traditional service model is that sponsor would go to their investment advisor or broker, name some big firms. That broker typically, while it offers a product or a 401k, and they work with only a select group of individuals. Now, there are a number of players in the 401k space. Okay? There's mutual funds, which is typically the investment vehicle. There are third-party administrators. They're the ones who are responsible for testing the plan to make sure it's not discriminating against lower-paid employees. They're also responsible for filing the tax return. Some of you have heard the 5,500, right? The record keeper is responsible for gathering the assets and splitting it up into individual employee accounts. They are the ones that provide the access to the website, if it's a daily valuation plan. They're also the ones who give some phone support to the participants, as well as the website and quarterly statements. The custodian, most of you know the names, but not necessarily what they do. So you're talking Schwab, Fidelity, TD Ameritrade. They're the ones who safeguard the assets. This is what was missing in the Madoff case. He was his own custodian. He had custody of the funds, okay? The custodian is really there to give safekeeping to those assets, so if something were to happen to any one of these service providers, those assets would still be there for your employees. So what are some of the hot buttons going on right now? Lawsuits for breach of their fiduciary duty. There's that word again, right? Employees are getting really upset that their plan may be too expensive or not being offered the right benefits in the 401k. Okay? Here's a laundry list of them. A lot of them revolve around fees, coincidentally. One of the things that they've been picking on. The interesting one here is the top. An employee of Ameriprise Financial was upset at their own company's 401k plan. Now, these are investment professionals, right? You think that they would get it right for their employees. Not necessarily so. Okay? The Department of Labor is not putting their head in the sand about this. Okay? Last year, well, a couple years ago, they introduced fee disclosures. Some of you have heard about them. I hope by now you have. You've addressed them because they went into effect last year. Okay? In the traditional 401k space, the fees and what everybody was being paid, let me go back here a minute. All these people that, when they were being sold a 401k, if you ask the employer, what are you paying for your 401k? Nothing. I'm not paying anything, right? The reality of it is the mutual funds might have been really expensive, taken out of the returns. I've seen them as high as 2.5%, 3.5% if you put an insurance wrapper around it. And then they revenue share or give commissions back to everybody in that group. Okay, that creates a conflict of interest. The Department of Labor said, all right, enough's enough. So in 2010, they were going to push these out, these fee disclosures out, to say, let's raise that curtain. Let's make the fees transparent. Of course, Wall Street pushed that can down the road, or kicked that can down the road, until finally in 2012, it was released. The first set of them was 408b2, okay? What that said is all those service providers must disclose the fees that they're receiving to the plan sponsors, okay? Then in August, it was the plan sponsor's responsibility, ultimately, to get that information to their employees. Most of them relied on their record keeper to provide that information, but you need to make sure that that is occurring as an employer. Here's the interesting thing. With the 408b2, if you don't get a fee disclosure from one of your service providers, you better ask them for it. And if they don't provide it to you in 30 days, you need to report them to the Department of Labor and then fire them. Otherwise, you could be susceptible to what's called a prohibited transaction, and the owner or the employer could be personally liable for that error. Okay, I'll go over some of that information a little bit later. So kind of scoured the internet a little bit, and I said, what are other people thinking about what would really make a great 401k? This is actually Michael Chamberlain. He blog posts on Forbes. One of them is invest or hire an investment fiduciary. Okay, you can hire an advisor who will accept that information in writing, that they are going to share that liability with the plan sponsor. They're the expertise to look at the investments, taking some of that off the employer's plate. Okay, the Department of Labor is fine with that. For those who know that they don't have the expertise in this area, they're allowed to hire somebody. Okay, that also frees up a lot of time for the employer to do what they do best, run their business, right? Let's not distract from that. Let's not make it an administratively burden to offer this benefit. The other piece, what makes a great 401k, is educating your employees, making sure that they have the tools that they need. Now, some of you may think, well, let's get the best investments in there. Not necessarily so. Investments is a small portion of it. What's going to control an employee's success in a plan more is what they're saving, and then what they ultimately are going to spend, and the behavior of how they act with those investments. So you need somebody who's going to address those needs of the employees and offer those educational seminars or one-on-one advice. You know, and I'll talk about a different service model in a little bit, but if you disconnect the investments from the advisor, if they don't get paid by the mutual funds, they are free to offer advice to employees. It's out there. Employees can get better information. Professionally managed portfolios. There's a number of studies that have been done, Vanguard being one of them, that says when you offer a list of mutual funds, I've seen them as many as 45, 55 different options, employees shut down. The more you offer, the more they shut down, in fact. What you need to do is make sure that your investment lineup, maybe 15 different funds is enough to make sure you get all areas of the market, both domestically and internationally. Offer bond funds and treasury inflation protected securities. But again, employees are left to still pick those funds. So what's a better way? Have an investment fiduciary combine those funds in a diversified model portfolio. So all an employee has to really do is get help from the advisor to say, should I have 100% equities as my option, 80%, 20%? Now, one of the industry's solutions to this has been target date retirement funds. A lot of you have heard about them, right? Target date 2045, 2055, 2035. The idea there is you pick the date or right close where you're going to retire. And what happens is that fund will be more aggressive in the beginning and get more conservative as you approach that date. The downfall with that, and there's been a lot of discussion about those, not all target date funds are the same. They have different glide paths, meaning they get more conservative either sooner or later. And there's been a lot of discussions about that. The one that I'm going to propose is that it only addresses one piece of evaluating somebody's risk, and that's their ability to take risk. How much time, their time horizon. It assumes that everybody has the same level of risk based solely on their age. What it's missing is the willingness to take risk. You know, if I'm a young individual and I'm risk averse, and I lost half of my portfolio in 2008 and 2009, I'm going to hate that target date retirement fund because I was 100% equities. What if I would be okay taking 60% stock risk as that same employee? Yes, I wouldn't have the opportunity to gain some of those same returns, but I also wouldn't have that downfall. Remember, success in a retirement plan is based more on saving than it is the investment you choose. So the other piece of the target date retirement funds that it doesn't address is the need to take risk. I just saw the study that the average 401k balance has just crept up over $50,000. That's startling. Remember, Social Security is only going to replace a third of your income, and maybe nothing, depending on how old you are, right? So we need to get that up. And the way to do that is to educate people about the importance of using a 401k. Low costs. The DOL and ERISA doesn't require you to get the lowest cost provider. They look at it as saying, first off, do you have a process to review it? They care more about the process that you take to evaluate things than the actual results. And second, are these fees reasonable or not? Reasonable for the services that you're receiving. So it's not always about finding the lowest cost provider. Obviously, that is important because that does impact results. So let me go through my 3 summary points here about the 401k and how to make it great. Minimize risk. Okay, we don't want the owner who's sponsoring this plan or company sponsoring this plan to be liable for things. If we can minimize those risks, the more enticed they are to have one of these plans. Okay? Maximize benefits. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more detail about that. We talked about a few, and manage expenses. So let's talk about manage risk. I've gone over some of these already. Remember, it's about the process, not the results. So if you don't have an investment policy statement, which is kind of the guiding light on how you or your advisor picks mutual funds, you better get one. Okay? That outlines the process of reviewing, selecting, and monitoring funds. Second, you want to document all your meetings. All the discussions that you may have about the 401k, document it, save it, okay? Because that shows your prudence when evaluating the 401k plan. We talked about the investment selection. If you breach your fiduciary duty, if you breach what you're supposed to be doing, the result can be 15 to 100% of the plan assets that the owner is personally liable for. Okay? So, go to maximize benefits. Remember, this is a benefit. It shouldn't be a problem or, oh, I got to talk about the 401k again. Use it in your recruitment and retention strategies of your employees. Tell them, be transparent with what the fees are. Let them speak that up to their friends and family so that they can go to their employer and saying, hey, what are we paying? Is it higher or lower? And can we compare? You know, if you have a great 401k plan, a lot of people are looking for this. Use it in your retention strategies. I'm going to stop there. Does everybody still hear me? Okay. We talked about the target date retirement funds. The other way to maximize benefits, and I talked a little bit about this, is plan design. Okay? Let me go through an example. Jim's a 55-year-old physician with 6 employees. Okay? He makes over $245,000 a year. And one of his big gripes was, Scott, I'm limited. I want to do not only my own deferrals, but I want to put in a profit-sharing contribution. But I'm limited by what others are doing or what I'm giving to others. Okay, I can't maximize it. Yes?
You said profit-sharing contribution, but isn't that totally different than 401k?
A couple years ago, the question was, is a profit-sharing 401k different? A lot today, no. They've been combined. Okay. A lot of times when that happens, though, they'll rename the new plan 401k profit sharing plan. Okay. Maybe most profit sharing plans are discretionary, or the piece of the 401k that's a profit sharing is discretionary. So the employees can make the employers can make an additional contribution, but they don't have to. So in your case, maybe they decided we don't want to run this plan anymore. Let's just roll in a 401k, and we're okay not having the flexibility to somewhere down the road add additional dollars. So he comes to me, and I'm going to take out the effects of actually his deferrals, but this is a great graph. He was contributing, and as a profit sharing, $50,000, of which he received, whatever that was, 68% or something of that contribution. And a lot of that is based on salary, ages as well. You can add or change the plan design to something that's called a cross-tested plan or new comparability, all right, where it takes into account more of the age and salary and different levels of groups, whether you have managers, staff, and owners. You can actually delegate groups. This is an extreme example, but in this case, what we did is we added a cash balance plan to the 401k. So we did the new comparability with the plan design on the 401k, and we added a cash balance plan, which is a defined benefit plan look-alike. But he was able to do an additional $166,000 contribution, and he got the lion's share of that. Okay? Obviously, the other employees got some too, okay? Which they wouldn't have otherwise gotten had he not done this. So it does benefit the other employees, but certainly him trying to defer some of his taxes or more of them, it was a great tax saving strategy for him. I have some of the numbers there if you're interested in the calculations. Some of you are analytical, so they're there for your review. Manage expenses. Again, costs impact employees and employers alike. Most business owners are also employees. So, and typically they may have some of the highest balance is in the 401k plan. So costs do matter. Again, we're not looking for necessarily the lowest cost, but some improvement there. The Department of Labor wants to know that you're checking on these costs on regular intervals, okay? They want to make sure that you have, one, some process and are doing it. Now, there are a couple ways to compare or make sure your costs are reasonable. One is do what's called an RFP, or request for a proposal, where you actually go out in the marketplace and put these long questionnaires together to different service providers, some about fees, some about their services. That's a very long and tedious process. I actually spent some time answering those for Vanguard. So it's very time consuming on the employer's part. The other way to do it is to engage in a third-party benchmarking service, where you go to, there's a couple out there, Dalbar has some stuff, Fiduciary Benchmarks is another one. You can pay to have those individuals look at your 401k profit sharing plan and evaluate across their database of different service providers what the different fee structures are and what other plans like you are doing. And come back to you and say, here are different measures. This is how complex your plan is or how simple it is and how it compares to the cost of other plans. Again, the Department of Labor doesn't really much care about the results other than that you have a process. You talked about it, you reviewed it, and you do it on a regular basis. The other way is to hire a investment fiduciary, financial advisor. A lot of them, and what we do for clients, is we work with many different service providers, and we're allowed to go out and check all of them for the individuals. We also can engage benchmarking services. So we have a lot of tools available to us. Here's an example. A couple years ago, this was a prospect, now a client. They were with a large insurance provider. Again, they had 45 different funds in their lineup, and they thought their plan was free. But when we dug down into the insurance contract and the mutual funds, as well as the cost they were paying the third-party administrator, what we came up is they were actually paying 2.44% every year. Okay? What we showed them is, one, their assets had grown to a level that should dictate a lower fee by their providers. That didn't happen. And when I say providers, their advisor, as you cross certain thresholds, you should negotiate that and say, all right, well, we crossed $1 million, so can we get a lower fee, percentage-wise? Mutual funds, the investment choices, they had the average weighted mutual fund there was 1.29%. The average for an actively managed fund is about 1.5%. Again, a lot of that cost is then revenue shared between the other service providers. So with those, there are different, what's called different share classes, and you can actually lower those as your assets grow. But again, that was never being reviewed, okay? Again, going back to prudence. So what we showed them is we can kind of disconnect everything and give you an advisor who's going to help your employees, give you access to mutual funds that have very low costs, 0.3%, okay? We're going to pay the record keeper so we know what we're paying them. In this other environment, they didn't know what they were paying a service provider, so how can they reasonably expect to review those costs if they don't know exactly what they're receiving? Okay? And obviously, we came down to 1.39%. How does that impact? So if one of the participants had $100,000 and they've been working there for 30 years, average return is 6%, that higher cost portfolio would have given them $100,000 less 30 years from now. That's a huge impact. So costs matter to both employees and employers alike. So again, kind of as a summary, let's talk about what makes the great 401k. Minimize risk, maximize benefits, and manage costs. Here are a list of some of the things that you want to look for, okay? You want to look for limiting your fiduciary responsibility. Either a couple ways to do that. You can hire an advisor. You can play the game as well. If something comes up, I want to be covered, so there's fiduciary liability insurance. You're required to have an ERISA bond if you run one of these plans. Fiduciary liability insurance is different, okay? You can reach out and look for those to protect the owners. Maximize benefits. Make sure that you're educating your employees, looking at plan design, looking at plan features. We talked about auto enrollment and auto escalation. Some of these things, or Roth 401k, some of these things employees are looking for. Okay? The only way to get that out is either ask them or have an advisor kind of come out and get the questions from the crowd to say, well, can't we do a Roth 401k? Well, not right now, but I'll suggest it to the sponsor to see if that's something that they can add. Manage expenses, reviewing the service providers on a regular basis, monitoring those fees. Okay? So, you can do it alone. As an employer, they can do it alone and do all those things. Or you can hire help. Now, I'm not saying to hire any help. I know there's a couple service providers that will say they'll give you a fiduciary warranty. But if you actually look in their contract or their nice little certificate that they give you, they don't take any liability. Okay? I'm going to give you two numbers out there. Okay? 321 and 338. Okay? They are codes in the ERISA law that allow for different types of fiduciaries. 321 is more of the consultant, the advisor view, who do some of those functions for you. Reviewing managing costs, reviewing plan design, reviewing features in the plan. 338 is the person who's taking that lineup of different funds, making sure that they're good funds and achieve the results that you want, and combining them maybe in managed portfolios. There are different people out there. This is how we service plans. Sometimes the 321 and 338 are combined. The interesting part is in your contract with that service advisor, you need to make sure that they accept fiduciary liability for the investments being offered. So again, here's the traditional model, and as I told you about revenue sharing, this service model, the Department of Labor doesn't really like, because they came out with all these regulations to lift the curtain and show what the fees are. Because of that revenue sharing that goes on in this service model, the advisors aren't free to give advice. They give guidance or education, okay? It also limits you to only one set of service providers, okay? These plans are being sold, not bought, okay? As an alternative to that, what we do, as I mentioned, we're part of a large advisor network of 130 firms like us around the nation called the BAM Alliance and Advisors Access. Part of that group, we've split that out and said, we understand that no one company is alike. Everybody has different employees, different census, different levels, and those solutions for each individual company are very different. You can't offer just one service provider. You got to look at a bunch to bring in the right experts at the right time to put in place the results that that company wants to achieve. So we give that support to some of the plan sponsors. and we bring in the appropriate individuals. Our advisor access program, we have a little comparison there of how we differentiate between some of the other brokers out there or going directly to the service provider. We remove those conflicts of interest. We are always transparent with the fees. We get access to high-level institutional funds that are usually only for institutions, keeping the low costs down, or keeping the costs down. Objective advice. So because we're not being paid by any of these other service providers, we can give advice to employers and employees alike, okay? I think if there's anything that you walk away from my presentation today, is that when you're evaluating your service providers, you shouldn't have to ask, what does it cost? They should be transparent with their fees and lay it out in a simple manner that everybody understands. This is actually a pull-out from one of our proposals, and it shows that we line item everything in basis points. Just say, here's your advisory fee, here's your third-party administrator, record keeper, and here are the investments, the weighted average of the expenses of the investments. That's the sign of someone who's going to work in the employer's best interest and in the employee's best interest. So I'm going to wrap things up there. Open to any questions. Okay. Thank you for your time.